North Shore of Boston is one of a number of areas across the country where there's a huge disparity between wages and housing costs.
The tagline of Family Promise is ending homelessness one family at a time. That was the premise at the beginning.
We had a big meeting one night down in the church hall. It was the same thing. Well, I don't know, because we didn't have enough churches to actually start the program. And the associate minister, Angie, at that point, stood up and she was like, we're going to do this. You people, this is your chance.
Really, the thinking was if there was a hurricane here or a flood or some kind of natural disaster, people would step up and they would take care of families. We have a national disaster. In this country and in Massachusetts, we have homeless families. All of those 9 different sites decided that they would do more than 4 times a year to get us going. And so that was how we launched in May of 2013.
We have all these beautiful big churches that sit empty most of the week. So we had the room. The premise was that the families would come here during the week. They would come here to eat, to sleep.
Massachusetts requires that the state have a certificate of occupancy as a temporary overnight shelter, unlike most states. So I was the lead person in helping them comply with the regulations in order to be approved.
If you go back to the beginning, we had to set up a 501c3, organize all that paperwork. We had to form a board of directors, think about hiring some staff, raise money enough to get started. But along with all that, we had to assemble a ton of volunteers. Each congregation or place people were going to stay needed about 50 or more volunteers for that week just to provide the hospitality and the meals and the overnight people. And it was a huge thing.
Mike Tudor was our first president, and he was really instrumental in launching the program. Sherry Marquardt was on the board, and she was involved in coordination of the volunteers. And Bill Nelson was our recruiter for congregations to get them committed.
We would do it Sunday to Sunday. So Sunday morning before church started, there would be a group of volunteers who would come in and they would set up all these cots. And we tried to make the rooms really nice. We put up curtains and we had lamps and little tables. So you're really setting them up for these nice little rooms.
I always thought it was really important when they were going to come to dinner that we set the table with a tablecloth, that we used silverware, that we used glasses, that we made it seem as if they were coming to your own house for dinner. The other thing that I think was really important is that we always ate with them. We ate together and we talked as if it was a family dinner. And I think that's important to say, you're our family for tonight.
I'll never forget when one of the first families came in, and it was a mother and 2 high school students. The girl walked in with her mother, and she looked at the room and she said, "Oh, is this my bed?" And I remember thinking, oh, it's just a cot. Maybe, she doesn't like it or whatever. And I said, well, is it okay? And she goes, yeah, it's just that I haven't had a bed. I haven't had a bed for so long. I have my own bed. And I was like, wow. Living in a car, living in, couch surfing in family and friends' apartments. And this girl finally had a bed, and it was just a cheap cot in a Sunday school room, with some curtains. And it made all the difference to her. That same girl, years later, I would go to a coffee shop where she worked, and she finished high school, and I would stop and see her, and now she was at Salem State in college and working on a nursing degree. All of a sudden, everything just stopped.
Whoa, wait, what are we going to do?
It became obvious that it was not safe for the families to rotate and to be exposed to so many volunteers, and conversely, the volunteers to be exposed to the guests.
I would say that COVID really made a huge impact on the housing crisis, not in terms of housing stock, but in terms of the amount of people who were finding themselves homeless for the first time or at risk of homelessness. These were families that may have been employed in the service industry or gig economy that all of a sudden had no work. The eviction moratorium allowed them to stay in their units for as long as that was in effect. However, it didn't prevent them from racking up debt. So by the time the eviction moratorium was lifted, we saw so many families that were in tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt that had no choice but to leave where they were at because they could not afford to keep up those payments. So these were families that were now becoming homeless for the first time in their lives, and families that often hadn't anticipated this would ever be something they'd experience.
We had to stop and say, okay, what do we have? We have a day center. Not designed to house families, but it's got a kitchenette, it's got a bathroom. We had to kick the staff out and say, okay, the director's office now becomes a bedroom for family one. Assistant director's office becomes the bedroom for family two. Our staff stepped up and did a fabulous job of saying, okay, we can solve this because you had to.
The launch of the Prevention and Diversion Program was really important. You know, one of the best ways to deal with homelessness is to prevent it from happening from the start.
So a lot of our families find themselves in situations where they may not qualify for, let's say, state shelter, but they definitely can't afford rent here. Advocacy is a strong component to Family Promise. It's our backbone. A lot of what the families are going through is stressful and traumatic. So it is helpful to have someone there so that the clients know that they have their own autonomy, but we're here as a resource, we're here as a guide, we're here as an advocacy tool.
So our case managers do everything from helping families locate new housing to keeping them in their current home. The case manager can sometimes be the difference between that family having a real chance at preventing that eviction.
You know, we need to address some of the system changes that are barriers to inclusion of people on the North Shore. It's disproportionately affecting people of color, and that's not right.
Homelessness is not a monolith, but homelessness also intersects with racial issues, employment issues, healthcare issues.
I think as an organization, over the last decade, we've done an incredible job really identifying and addressing the needs of families in creative ways. Prior to the pandemic, we were really serving a smaller number of families. But at this point, we've seen so many calls coming in on a regular basis that we only want to increase our capacity to serve these families. That might look like a static site shelter that can serve 8 to 10 families at a time, or increasing our case management capacity.
I'm very proud of our staff. I just can't get over our staff. I just think Rachel is the greatest thing in the world. And she has assembled a staff of the most caring, nurturing, compassionate people to do this extremely difficult work. It sounds weird, but I'm proud of our board of directors. When I get through with a board meeting, I always leave with this feeling of how much these people want to help.
I would say at this point, Family Promise is so much more than just a shelter. We are a program that is advocating for and really enacting change on a systemic level.
We have an annual walk, and many of those families will come to those walks, and it's so awesome to see the kids growing up and to hear about where they're living now and what they're doing and where they are in school. So what a difference, a simple idea, what a difference it made.